Hello everybody! JGC Anime here today. We're to review the third One Piece movie. So without further ado, let's just hop right into this. So the next movie we got on our list is Chopper's Kingdom on the Island of Strange Animals. This story follows the Straw Hats trying to find some rare treasure on an animal island, where they end up getting separated from Chopper, who goes flying off of the Going Merry. And while this technically doesn't make much sense since Robin isn't there, which makes you wonder where the heck this is supposed to take place on the timeline, since Vivi isn't there either, but I don't mind that much because it's just a One Piece movie that's just trying to tell its own story, so I'm not gonna bother about it too much. But anyways, since Chopper got separated from the rest of the Straw Hats, he now has to be stuck in this role as king, set up by this group of animals that have said a king would fall from the heavens, and Chopper just happened to fall from the heavens. So now they think Chopper is their king, and while he's just there, the Straw Hats are on their way to go find him, all while these evil villains are working behind the scenes to try to find these mystical treasures that will make them all powerful. But yeah, that's not a great plot description, but we're just gonna roll with it. So, in terms of spoiler-free thoughts of this film, I'll say it's better than the second one. Like, I really didn't care much for the second one. In fact, I thought it was pretty bad overall. And while I don't think it was the worst thing ever, I definitely think that this film improves a little bit over the last one. I heard that this is one of the most hated One Piece films, but I didn't really get why. I didn't despise it. I don't think it was necessarily amazing. Like, I wasn't thinking, oh man, this is such a good film. But at the same time, I was never bored during it, and I definitely think that out of the three films I've watched so far, it has some of the best pacing. Not like amazing pacing, like the best pacing ever for a film, but the pacing isn't as bad. There are still moments where they'll jump to a scene that doesn't make sense, or they'll move towards a section of the story that I feel we shouldn't be at yet. But at the same time, I still think that overall the film definitely improves the pacing a lot more to the others, despite the fact being around the same runtime. And not only that, but there were actually some decent jokes in here, whereas in the second film there were some jokes that I got a laugh at, but there weren't that many. In this film, there are definitely a lot more jokes that hit. Not like a phenomenal amount like every single joke, but I do find myself laughing a lot more than I thought I would. And Chopper as the main character of this film, while not fully the main character, there are some other people who get some attention in this film. He's not a bad main character. Like, I think that Chopper in this film, while he felt a bit more scared and nervous than usual, it didn't bother me that much. In fact, I think it just added to his character development throughout the film, even if it might have felt a bit off at times. Just, it's fine for what it is, and I still think that overall this film is better than the second one in a lot of ways, as the plot feels a bit more consistent, and while it is a more simple plot with less drama to it, it's fine, it's enjoyable. I had a decent time with it. And yeah, if there's one thing I guess I could complain about without spoiling anything, it would definitely have to go to the villains. I thought the villains in this film were some of the weakest One Piece villains I've ever watched. Like, I didn't care for these One Piece villains at all. In fact, I kind of hated them. And I think that if you remove them from the film, it would probably be a bit more entertaining. It's just, as the antagonists of this story, they were definitely the weakest part. I didn't like them at all. I found them to be annoying. I found them to be dull. And the only reason that the Straw Hats struggle against them at all during this film is simply because the plot asks them to. Like, if this was a regular One Piece adventure, these guys would have been destroyed instantly. But because, you know, they need to drag the plot out for as long as they can, they have to just be like, all right, these villains are now kind of OP, but just believe me, please believe me. And I guess another thing I can complain about is how I felt like Luffy was kind of a side character in this film. Like, minus a few things that I could talk about in the spoiler section, he really doesn't do that much. Luffy doesn't even say that he's gonna be king of the pirates in this film, which I don't know if people will care about that or not, but it's something I noticed. And basically, I just felt like Luffy was very much a side character in this film, and he could have had a bit more attention focused on him. I get this is meant to be Chopper's film, but at the same time, the other two movies, despite the fact they mixed a bunch of different characters into the focus, Luffy still had his role to play in the story, and I felt like he was still one of the main characters, but he just felt very sidelined in this film. Even though he acts the same way as he always does, he just doesn't really get much spotlight, which, again, not a big problem, but seeing him be kind of sidelined was a bit sad. But Chopper isn't a horrible replacement, just not who I'd want to see in the main character role for the rest of the story. But yeah, moving past all that though, the film overall is just kind of alright. It has a few other flaws, such as the fact that they have to force in another child character to learn some kind of lesson or other, because why not? They just have to shove those in there because there is literally no other reason. They just have been shoving one into every single film. And while the film definitely has a few other flaws I could point out later on, I definitely think that overall this film isn't awful, but it wasn't that fun at the same time. It just was kind of a bit dull. It definitely could have been a lot stronger, and those are just my thoughts. And yeah, that's Utterly Selfless spoiling, so we're just gonna hop into the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp to when spoilers. If you have seen the movie or don't care about spoilers, you can stick around and hear my spoiler thoughts. But if you haven't seen the movie, you don't want to get any spoilers, I'd recommend skipping to the end so you don't get any spoilers. But again, if you have seen it or you don't care about spoilers, I'd recommend sticking around to hear my thoughts. So yeah, I'm going to catch up for 5, and I'm going to enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so first thing I want to go over is actually the final battle in the film, where the main villain of the three that for some reason likes to eat horns, I believe his name was Count Butler or something. I just found his character to be definitely the worst of the three between the main villains. The other villains had their own problems, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but for the main villain of this whole film, he was just downright awful. Like, I hated his character so much. I despised him. And the fact that they tried to build him up as a threat annoyed me a little bit, because basically he's weak the whole film. Like, he's this weak guy who just has this violin that he uses to control some animals to chase after these horned animals that he was hoping to eat and gain powers from. But then at the end of the film, once he gets the horns he's looking for, he eats them and suddenly he becomes all powerful and easily defeats Luffy. And then after that, Chopper steps in and helps out a little bit before Luffy comes back and beats the crap out of this guy. And that's one of the rare times Luffy does anything in this film. Other than that, he's pretty sidelined. And yeah, I just didn't like him as a villain. I thought he was annoying. I thought he was dull. And just as an overall enemy of the Straw Hats, I definitely think he is one of the weakest villains of these movies so far. Like, One Piece movie villains haven't had much of a good history with me. Like, I've never really enjoyed any of them, but I've never hated any of them. But this guy has to be the first time I could say that I actually didn't like a One Piece villain. Like, I kind of hated this guy. I found him to be super annoying. I really hated his character. And as a villain, he just didn't add much besides that little moment at the end where he gets Team Rockets blasting off again, and that's about it. As a villain, he is by far one of the weakest parts of this film, and I just hate him a lot. But yeah, moving past that, we'll go back to earlier in the film where we'll discuss the child character known as Mobambi. And he is fine. This is just a thing with One Piece films. Basically, his whole thing is that his father was killed by the main villain, and he's now living on this island of animals, and basically, by the end of the film, he just becomes the king of the animals, because why not? That's just a thing that happens in the film, and yeah, just like a bunch of the other kid characters they keep including in these movies, he doesn't add much. He is just there for the sake of adding a kid character and then to learn some form of lesson, which they've been doing with all these films. I hope they'll stop doing that soon enough, but they still doing it right now, and I, again, really hope they stop doing that, because the kid characters are usually some of the weakest characters in these films. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. Didn't care for him that much. He's just another one of the kids in that section of, hey, I need to learn some kind of lesson from the Straw Hats, and that was about it. It's how it is, and I'm moving on. I just wanted to talk about him a little bit, saying how I didn't care much for his character, because he just doesn't add that much. He's literally there just to learn some kind of valuable lesson, and that's about it. And yeah. But moving to the other characters now, I want to talk about the fights with Zoro, Sanji, and the other enemies. Basically, Zoro is fighting this guy who, despite claiming to be the strongest guy in the world, he relies very heavily on kicking, similar to Sanji. And the other guy who calls himself like the most handsome guy in the world and just woos all the women and has a weapon that he uses to cut stuff up. They basically go against these guys, and it's like how Sanji would be fighting Zoro and Zoro would be fighting Sanji, but it's these enemies instead. And it is nice how at the end of those fights, they say like, oh man, your kicks are way weaker than his, or oh man, your slices are way less strong than his. Those moments were fine enough, but I felt like the build-up to them was very forced. Like, before this point in the film, I never felt like these enemies were a threat. Never once while watching did I think, oh man, the Straw Hats will really struggle against these guys. So for them to suddenly, after beating up these guys for so long, suddenly struggle to defeat them, I felt that was rather forced. It definitely feels like they weren't really caring about how the Straw Hats were fighting. That's one problem these films have, where they're always weakening the Straw Hats in order to make it look like the villain's a big, powerful enemy, which I don't like that much. Now, I know they're not meant to be like their time skip counterparts, which are extremely OP, but even back in the older One Piece days, they still had their strength, which is why I am so disappointed to see them constantly in these films just get battered and beaten for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that, oh man, we gotta add some tension to this film, and that's the only reason that they add all that. And it's a bit annoying, but it is what it is. I didn't like it a lot, and while it's not the worst thing ever, I just felt it was very forced. But yeah. But moving on to one of the last two things I want to talk about, I guess one other thing I want to discuss is how the fights in this movie felt very anticlimactic. Like, I don't know what it is with One Piece movie fights, but so far they have been incredibly weak. Like, I have not cared at all for a lot of these fights. I definitely think they're just really weak. They move by too fast. They try to spend no time at all actually fighting these guys. Like, they'll just rush through the fights as quick as they can. Fights in One Piece, as we know in the anime, they last for a long time, but in this movie's case, they don't last nearly as long as I'd like them to, and I just think that the fights in this film just overall weren't amazing. But yeah, the final thing I would like to talk about is Chopper's character in this film, which I know I talked about before, but I'd like to expand on a little bit. It's not awful, but it definitely feels a bit odd at how much Chopper is trying to be a weakling in this film, because we've seen him do a lot of cool stuff in Alabasta and other stuff up to this point. Even on Drum Island, he did a lot of crazy stuff. Well, not crazy, but you get what I mean. And I felt like this film kind of downplayed a lot of that, where Chopper is suddenly scared of every little thing, which isn't fully out of character for him, but not as in character as I remember. But then again, this has been a long time, so I don't know if everything's correct or not. It's been a long time since I watched those arcs, but I just felt like Chopper in this movie felt a bit off. Like, he wasn't bad, but he definitely felt like he could have been a lot stronger. So yeah, Chopper, not the worst part of this film, but it did feel like his arc in this film to be less scared felt a bit forced at times, but it's not bad. I can live with it. It wasn't an awful film overall, and while I don't think it's an amazing piece of One Piece media, I do think that's better than the second movie. The second movie still, to me, is the weakest one of them all, and I just hope that as the movies go on, they can get better, because so far, I have been a bit unimpressed. But again, hopefully, the movies will get better from here. I've heard some of the later stuff is really good, so we'll just have to see. And yeah, that's all I have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video. What are my final thoughts? Overall, this film is not bad. It's not awful, but it does tend to be a bit dull at times. The story can drag on for some time, despite the fact it's moving so fast, it's kind of hard to understand what's happening. And it's just weird to kind of say that, because I definitely think that if this film actually tried to take its time a bit more, I think that maybe, just maybe, it could have been a decently good film. But they try to rush through all the major plot beats really fast and only really slow down to make a few small jokes here and there. And I definitely wish the film could have been a bit more entertaining. And yeah, overall, I give One Piece Movie 3, Chopper's Kingdom on the Island of Strange Animals, a 5 out of 10. It's definitely not as bad as the second movie, but it's not as kind of fun and entertaining to watch as the first movie either. So yeah, that's all I have to say, and thank y'all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. Also go Anime Fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!